Welcome to In the Money, sponsored by Flyer Financial Technologies, the company that builds cutting-edge technology designed to solve asset and wealth management firms' toughest trading workflows. In this podcast, we help advisors and asset managers understand how technology is transforming the wealth tech sector. We'll cover how to leverage technology for faster, smarter investment decisions, megatrends, and more. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to In the Money. I'm your host, Rusty Sommer, and a great guest on this episode. And I think the old ways of doing business are gone. And if your RIA isn't evolving, you're falling behind. Brian Hamburger is a leading voice in the independent advice space. And this is where we're going to get started today. So Brian, thanks for joining me on In the Money.
Thanks so much for having me. This is such an honor to be here.
No, I appreciate it. It's definitely my honor. So we're at your conference. We're at MarketCounsel in Vegas. It's the end of December. And this is the capstone event every year. And I think one of the things that I really like about this conference is the attendees. And the content's great, don't get me wrong. You hit all the major themes, but you bring a really interesting, diverse, and smart group of people together to share ideas and talk about what's going on.
Yeah. There's no doubt. I mean, one of our primary objectives is creating community, right? And it's hard to create community when everyone's coming at different levels. And other conferences I know target younger advisors, next generation advisors, advisors that are out there, looking at this a little bit differently. And I respect all of those conferences. We support them throughout the year. What we've really focused on developing through our 16 years of hosting the MarketCounsel Summit is an invitation-only platform that brings together founders and CEOs, right? The leadership of independent wealth management firms, and not just the current leadership, but the emerging leadership of these firms, to come together and have an elevated discussion, right? I call it a masterclass, right? Because it's not just, and by the way, it's not just from the stage a masterclass. This is a cohesive event where people are talking from the stage, but then if you notice, we have plenty of breaks and room for people to then have conversations off the stage, and they're engaging in debate and dialogue, and they're talking about, hey, does that check with what you've been noticing? Because that's interesting. So I like to think that, there's so many conferences out there and they're going about it in really great ways, but we're trying to look at this and trying to maintain a decidedly different approach than others.
Yeah. So I think, timing wise, this is a great point. I mean, it's Wednesday, it's kind of conference is starting to wrap up. What are the key takeaways and major themes from this year's summit?
I'm going to tell you, this is going to be a low end answer for you, right? I like to set the bar low. The major theme here is that we don't know what we don't know, right? And so coming together at the end of the year, it does gives us and the advisors that attend and the service providers and the media, the press that are in attendance, gives us a chance to come and say, hey, here are my observations from the past year. Here's my assessment of the next 12, 24 months ahead. What are you seeing, right? And sometimes they're like, hey, that checks out. Other times they're saying, I'm seeing something completely different. Right. And it might have been off of our radar. Yeah. And so there's a dose of humility that comes with attending this conference, which is I'm coming into this room with people who know as much or more than me, in different areas. Sure. And I love that. So it's a real learning experience. It's not just out, we're not out there just spewing from the stage. This is what you need to know, and here's what the next 5 to 10 years are going to look like. It's not one of those conferences, right? It's a really different conference where we're coming to learn as much as we're coming to share.
What would you say the overall mood and sentiment of the RIA community is right now?
And so we're at such an interesting intersection. I think there's a little bit of hangover from so much of the deal making that's been done over the last several years, right? There are people that are still intent on continuing the progress of those deals and valuations and the velocity of those deals. But I think there are also seedlings of creativity and innovation that are being planted that haven't existed because so many people were focused on traditional business metrics for the last several years, right? How do we get to optimal valuation? I think a lot of people have also decidedly underinvested in R&D, right, and innovation within this space. And traditionally, if you go back 20, 25 years, as long as I've been in the wealth management space, the most successful firms aren't the ones that are just kind of stamping out a more efficient widget. They're the ones that are actually seeing things differently and executing according to a different plan. And so I think the industry is at this really interesting intersection where we're taking well-known leaders within the space and familiar faces, and we're saying, hey, how do we leverage that? And maybe not have those folks lead from out front. Maybe have them do what they do, but also diversify that leadership and broaden that team and make for a more resilient company that has creativity and innovation at their core. And that's what's really exciting to me, because just doing something better than the person before. I'm not great at like getting passionate about building faster boats, right? I want to help people, tackle things in new and innovative ways that haven't been seen before.
Yeah. What do you think the current landscape is like for independent advisors?
The landscape is as diverse as ever, and I think it's becoming more diverse. I think when we first started out, this was kind of a unpaved road, right, with covered wagons, right? And there were pioneers, making their way within the independent space. Now it looks a little more like the New Jersey Turnpike, right? There's 11 lanes. Right. There's signs going everywhere. In some areas there's no signs at all. You just kind of have to know, which exit to get off.
Right.
And so I think it's becoming far more robust than it ever was, but it's also becoming in some ways a little more uncharted than it was before, where people have so many options. And if you stack those options on top of one another, and then you take those options and you have different ones that you stack on top of one another, you have decidedly different results. And so I think that's where a lot of the creativity is coming from, is, how do we assemble these parts in a different way to create a differentiating client experience, right? And that's what it's all about for so many of these advisors.
So I think that the relationship between advisors and clients is evolving, and technology is clearly playing a very key role in that. How do you think technology and changing client expectations are reshaping the advisor-client dynamic?
The pandemic has been very informative and impactful to investment advice, right? So we had a line in the sand where advisors could no longer rely upon having that quarterly meeting at the client's dining room table, right? And I know we were already getting away from that before the pandemic, but then the pandemic showed advisors really what clients value. They don't value the Class A office space, right? They don't, or it's not that much, right? They don't value the fact that your receptionist remembers that they like a Diet Coke with very little ice. Those are really nice little things to have. But at the end of the day, it gave the advisors the ability to understand what really was valuable to the client, which is having an objective, trusted advisor in their corner. And then the advisor, I think, had to start asking the questions, well, how do I deliver that objective advice in a way that really resonates with my client, right? And so many of them became really within years. So many of them realized that clients are actually comfortable with getting that delivery on a screen instead of sitting in an office, and that the density of their client meetings could be far greater than they were before. And so their value systems, I want to say, changed overnight. They didn't change overnight, but almost like it felt like there was that line in the sand.
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, I actually can do a Zoom call every 20, 30 minutes and achieve a high degree of client satisfaction.
Yeah. Okay. That's perfect. You really are an expert on some things, right? You're actually expert on a lot of things, but compliance and regulatory considerations are certainly one of the areas I think that you bring a lot of expertise. Talk to us a little bit about like what you bring to that conversation.
We have people within MarketCounsel Consulting and the Hamburger Law Firm who are far more talented than I am at regulatory compliance. Where my focus has been for the last several years is how do we weave together our brand of objective counsel, right? Our tagline has always been the advisor's advisor, and we take that very seriously. And so how do we weave together our ability to support them with objective advice so that whether they are recruiting, whether they are dealing with privacy, data security issues, whether it's regulatory compliance, whether it's a potential a new capital investment or bringing in a new partner or figuring out the next gen, how do we plug in at the appropriate stage they are in their life cycle? How do we meet the clients where they are and give them the advice they need so they can confidently go to that next meeting and knock it out of the park and succeed?
I'm interested in your opinion on something.
Sure.
Because politically, there's a pretty big shift going on.
You don't say.
I don't say. Is the obvious statement. And I think that the outgoing and incoming administration have different viewpoints on regulation and I'm curious to hear what you think about what the next year or the next 4 years is going to look like from a regulatory standpoint and how it's going to impact our business?
It's a great question. And it's one I wish I could answer with a high degree of certainty.
Sure.
I think anyone that tells you they know what's going to happen in the next 4 years, here's what I can tell you. They're wrong, right? I can absolutely confidently say that, right? And if they think that it's going to mean X versus Y, they're going to be wrong, right? Because there's so many things changing simultaneously. It's not just the regulatory agenda, right? It's the political support and the shifting landscape there. It's where resources and financial assets are being allocated. If you take a look at the mood at the SEC, right, our federal regulator, take a look at the mood there. The regulations that have been written of late and that are being written are being torn down, right? Will be torn down. And we're going to start fresh. We're going to start anew. We have an administration who was decidedly more favorable to innovation in digital assets, cryptocurrency, AI, predictive analytics, right? All of these things where the SEC has been focused on erecting safeguards and boundaries. We don't quite know what the new administration is going to do, but they're going to be far more supportive of innovation within that space. And so I suggest that what we are likely to see is a far greater clip of innovation, of new technologies, of new ways of doing business. And this Investment Advisors Act of 1940, which I'm certain will continue to be the cornerstone of regulation within this space, will look a lot different by way of rulemaking and no action letters over the course of the next several years.
Yeah, well, there'll be a lot to see and to be heard and to think about, and I think that RIA firms particularly need to pay attention to that in order to adapt to what those changes are, because they want to remain competitive. They want to serve their clients, and knowing what is expected and required of them in an industry that is highly regulated is really important.
So I'm going to slightly correct you on one thing, because I do think that if we look back 10, 20 years ago, I think what you said is entirely accurate. But I think the calculation is infinitely more difficult now. And the reason is, yes, as a firm, you need to have good regulatory compliance measures, right? You need to have good risk mitigation measures. You need to have good legal counsel. But good is really, while it's the simplest word in that stack, it's actually the most complicated word, because what is good for you is not good for someone else, right? So if you look at what advisors were doing a decade to 2 decades ago, they were getting forms and templates, and they were saying, "Hey, this is what my buddy's using, and so we're just gonna use this ourselves." Well, now if you look at the wealth management space, these businesses, while they have this common streak of giving investment advice, they look far different than one another, right? And so the risks that impact one firm may be far different than the risks that impact another firm. And so it's a matter of not only knowing the evolving nature of regulatory compliance and legal threats and risks, it's also knowing your own business cycles and all of the external vendors and resources and technology that you use. And so it's tracking those simultaneous permutations at once. And I mean, we're in Vegas, so I'll stay on brand, right? The parlay bet is far more difficult, right, than the individual bet. The individual bet, smart people can say, okay, my chances are 1 in 2, so 54%, chance I'm giving money back to the house. But then when you stack those bets on top of one another, right, it gets a lot more complicated from there.
Yeah, interesting. That's great. So, building a successful RIA is a challenge. It's hard. How does MarketCounsel help RIAs achieve their goals?
We have no horse in the race other than supporting the vision of entrepreneurs within this space. And so our ability to repel in and to really embrace their vision, take it as our own, and provide them with products and services that support their vision. That could be growth. That could be an eventual sale. That could be just a successful launch, and then we'll kind of figure it out from there. It's really, as I mentioned, meeting clients where they are, and really embracing their vision of success. I mean, if you walk around, these rooms, and you talk to advisors, and you really delve into their vision of success, it's going to be different, right? Some people are going to say to you, we want to grow 20% a year over year, right? We want to create an entire next generation of advisors. I want to spend more time on the golf course. Like, I mean, they could be totally different, right? Yeah. And so we're not here to judge whose vision of success is better than anyone else's vision. We're here to then plug in where we can be additive. And if we're providing objective counsel from an informed position, we think that's how we can best lend ourselves to to be their partner.
So as we wrap up 2024 and we head to 2025, be interested to know what your predictions are. What is the maybe one big thing in 2025 that you think is going to impact our landscape most?
It's going to be interesting to see how quickly the new regulatory regime can hit the ground running. There's a really interesting mix of inexperienced regulators and very experienced regulators. So I don't think it's all going to be growing simultaneously. That the leadership within federal agencies is actually really important, right? Because if you look at what's transpired over the last several years, there's been a lot of crossover, or what we often call duplicative regulation, right? You have the FTC going out there regulating AML instead of the SEC taking out, going out front, or you got the Treasury Department taking the lead on that. So are we going to have leadership within these regulatory agencies that are going to allow them to have smart rulemaking?
Right.
Here's the interesting thing. People often will talk about that they don't want any regulation. Well, the reality is that everyone who runs a successful business does want regulation. They just want regulation that's really clearly articulated from the outset so that they can better predict where to invest and grow their business. And so I don't have a prediction. I have a hope. And my hope is that we can continue to see regulatory progress that is aligned with growth of an industry, and we'll get back, allow firms to confidently get back to being able to invest in the businesses that they care most about.
I think it's a great perspective. And as much as I've been talking to people the last 2 days, that's a fresh perspective that people have not really talked about, but I think that it's spot on.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just want to say thanks for joining us in today's episode of In the Money. I'm your host, Rusty Sommer. I'm fortunate enough to be joined today by Brian Hamburger of MarketCounsel. If you don't know Flyer FT, we power the fintech you love and use every day. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to In the Money, the show that delivers advisors, asset managers, broker-dealers, and other technology service providers the knowledge they need to navigate this industry. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Flyer Financial Technologies. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only.